Here we go.
One of the all-time great championship survival escapes.
And there it is. Reading FC are relegated to League One from the Championship. Welcome to the Tilehurst podcast. Yes, Reading Football Club are a League One football club. I don't think I'll ever get used to saying that, at least for a few weeks at least. And we've decided to do an emergency podcast about it. I mean, it feels fitting, but Jesus Christ, we might struggle for the next 20 minutes or so. God bless you for tuning in. I can totally understand anyone who would not want to listen to this podcast, particularly so fresh as we're recording this, and whether it's Friday morning or Sunday morning, or whether you're listening to this driving up to Huddersfield or you're listening to this instead of driving up to Huddersfield, thank you very much for tuning in. We will be doing a season review podcast next week, but I thought it was necessary. We were going to do a preview show for the Huddersfield game, but I don't think we're really going to talk much about our predictions and such for that game now. So, I'm your host, Marc Mayo, as per usual. And joining me to talk about what has gone on tonight are a couple of our finest minds, who I'm sure are right in the doldrums at the moment, but God bless them coming on. Olly, Alan, how's it going, mate?
Yeah, you've asked me that several times. It's tricky to answer that one today. It's an indescribable feeling, really. It's just you kind of just feel numb, I think, a little bit. I think the last couple of weeks I think a lot of people have kind of come to accept the fact that relegation's probably likely, but it still hits a little bit differently when it's actually confirmed. And you kind of at least hope we might be able to have it in our own hands on the final day. But just to watch another game play out and just feel completely sort of helpless to what's happening in front of you is just depressing and pretty. Very, very saddening, really. To say that Reading are going to be playing League One football next season is heartbreaking. Really.
Also joining us tonight is Ross Webber joining us. How's it going, mate?
Well, it's staying as positive as I can, but I think Ollie's hit the nail on the head there with the word helpless. I think that's kind of how I've been feeling over the last few weeks, but. I gotta hold the head somewhat high in the coming days and try and enjoy the last game, and then hopefully a better summer to come. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll be talking a bit more in the coming weeks. As I say, we've got the season review podcast coming next week, and we'll be talking a bit more about what we want out of the team and what we want out of League One. Everything. This is kind of to talk about why Reading have been relegated and kind of our initial thoughts on it and everything. So I'll get straight into it with a quick word, as always, for our sponsors, ZCZ Films, and thanks to our Patreon subscribers. Olly, one of the things that's really struck me in the last few weeks about Reading Football Club, as a football club, I mean, you can say this for quite some time about the off-pitch stuff, but generally on the pitch, Reading have been able to hold it together through thick and thin. But on the pitch and off the pitch in the last few weeks, I've been really struck by how out of our depth we are in the Championship, not just against the likes of Norwich and West Brom, who have the parachute payments, who have the wage structure and everything, and, Premier League recent experience that goes for them. Obviously, we're up against those guys, that's fine. But also the likes of Preston and Millwall and teams that don't earn any more money than we do on a day-to-day basis, who don't have a particularly impressive stadium academy fan base any more than we do. And yet these guys who did basically what Reading have done for the last 2 decades, we're not able to do that anymore. And they're still able, it is still possible in this day and age to do that kind of slightly punching above your weight, holding your own and having a good go sort of mentality, which is generally still successful. Reading just have not been able to do that for a multitude of reasons, but that's the feeling that I get with this relegation, is that we have just been out of our depth in this league now for whether it's years or months or whatever, but it's finally now taking its toll.
Yeah, I'll go back to that word helpless again. We've watched this football for the last few months now, where Reading just haven't really looked like creating anything or looked like scoring, having any sort of inspiration. That stems from the tactics and the ideologies of Paul Ince. And to be honest, the club's not really been able to recover from that. Nolan's obviously come in since it's gone, and to be honest, the improvement in the first couple of games was noticeable to a degree. Getting a point against Burnley, getting a point against Luton, but really it just seems as if these players they had it all taken out of them. Really, I think in the last few months under Ince. I'm not saying that the Paul Ince is the sole reason that this club has been relegated, but a large credit, if you want to call it credit, has to go to him. Really, because the results under him, ultimately, I think we'd have liked to have sat in a slightly better position and said, well, if it weren't for the 6-point deduction, we would have stayed up. But the reality is now Reading would very much be in all sorts of trouble, even with those 6 points added on, and that's purely just down to such terrific form over the last few months, or since the turn of the year. Really, no win since February sums up.
And I agree with you. Paul Ince possibly to blame for that.
Yeah, no, it's when you see it written like that, no win since February. It's just that is a team that deserves to go down. Regardless of points deductions or whatever. If you're not winning games and teams around you are winning games, and it's very easy to sort of look at the results over the last week or so and think that no one has done Reading any favours. Every other team has. Rotherham beat Middlesbrough. Huddersfield obviously have won their last 2 games against Cardiff, and tonight against Sheffield United. Cardiff themselves beat Rotherham to pretty much stay up last week. It's easy to sort of look at that and say that the other teams have relegated Reading, but Reading are the only team to blame for what's happened this season, what's happened in the last few months, because they've not been able to pick up those points themselves. Reading were almost in such a comfortable position at the start of the year. It didn't even look as though relegation was any sort of possibility. And even when the 6 points were deducted, really, it didn't look as if Reading were in massive danger immediately. But the fact that the slide has just continued over the last few months in terms of results has ultimately led to this. And so they haven't got anyone else to blame but themselves.
Yeah, Ross, in terms of where we are, like your instant feeling of the most culpable party for this. I mean, there's you could talk about the players, and they've not had a great last few weeks, and I think as well there's a bit of a sense that I just feel like with the players that they put so much into last year's coming back from 6-point deduction, and this one came at the worst time because, as Olly says we were basically comfortable when it did happen. The season was cruising to a pretty happy finish. And this was a real gut punch for the players to deal with. I think that has to be said mentally. But then they've also, you can count a fair few players that haven't performed, et cetera, et cetera. Then when it comes to the managers, I don't think anyone will blame Noel Hunt for this, but he obviously wasn't able to get that win at Wigan, which was a necessity as a manager, whether you're inexperienced or not. Paul Ince as well couldn't put an away side together, for anything. It was barely a point we registered on the road under Paul Ince. And then there's the owner as well, De Jong, and how he's managed the team. There's various historical people we could also bring in as well. But I mean, not to kind of hedge your answer too much, but for me, it really is the owner that fundamentally De Jong has made so many decisions left, right and centre when it comes to selling players, appointing bad managers. And the way that the finances have just been handled in general all just stem back to one person who's tried to run a football club and just aren't capable of doing it.
Yeah, no, I agree. The after I wrote down, the word helpless that we've said a few times, as well as frustrated, and maybe we'll get onto hopeful later, but maybe not. The first thing I wrote is that Reading have been poorly run. And at the end of the day, that comes back to the owner. Now, I do also believe that they've been poorly run at the worst possible time to be poorly run in the Championship right now. I think that you guys are driving at a good point when you say, we know we can't compete with teams like up there like West Brom, Norwich, Bournemouth, Sheffield United in terms of pay packets, parachute payments, all of those things. But now we're struggling to keep up with other teams that are down there like Preston, Millwall and teams like that. But those teams are kicking on a bit. And there are teams down there now that have been in the Premier League within recent enough memory. Stoke are down there, fading a bit for Birmingham now, but Cardiff as well. The whole league is just... it's becoming a very difficult measure. I just do not think the championship is a sustainable proposition at the moment. And that makes it very hard when you don't have an owner who can do something that maybe teams like Brentford, Brighton have done, where they're able to make more value out of what they have. Maybe they're able to search in scouting locations that, were easier to find better value deals, but Dai Young and his team, for whatever reason, haven't done that. Even the signings that have gone relatively well, Lucas Shaw, that's an expensive signing from another championship club. That's not exactly searching, in a place that you might find value. George Puskás came in from Inter Milan. You're going to pay a premium or at least some extra money just because he was a prospect from Inter Milan at that time. These are not the most sensible things you could do. It kind of feels like you're playing on FIFA and you're going and picking the best clubs and taking some of their kids just because they've got big names. I think that there's definitely been issues with how Reading have been run. And you can kind of see that all the way down. But I think the transfer and recruitment has been the most obvious place. It's good to see that he seems to have stepped back from that a little bit this season. But I do think that, that's just clearly put us into a hole that we were unable to dig ourselves out of. But I do want to say again, just one last time, I really don't think the championship is a sustainable proposition anymore for teams that haven't been in the Premier League in the last 5 to 10 years. You look at the wage bills from the teams that went up in the top two last season, way above anyone else in the division. And I just don't think that the profitability and sustainability rules are able to keep up with the way the transfer market has changed massively in recent years. Obviously, the crazy deals that are going on with the elite level clubs that are boosting the prices of everything. COVID had a big impact, and Brexit had a big impact on how people recruit players and things like that as well. And I'm just not convinced that the EFL is an organization that is able to respond to those. So yes, Reading have been poorly run. I can point to other clubs that have been very poorly run in the championship, though, and they haven't suffered in the same way. So I think that it's, mostly Reading's fault that they're going down. But I think that it's such a punishing league now because it's not sustainable that as soon as you get yourself in trouble, it's very hard to dig yourself back out again.
Yeah, I'd agree with that strongly as well. I think that the EFL... Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years and such, because I mean you add into that as well the elite player performance plan, which means that basically if you have a good 16-year-old in your Academy 2 or Category 2 or Category 3 Academy, then Man United can take that 16-year-old for about 100 grand, which is just ludicrous when you think about the sort of money that these players are worth now to these clubs, and they just get plucked and that's it. I've asked for some questions from you guys on the Twitter. I've got about 9 replies as I'm talking at the moment. It's been up about 20 minutes, so if you replied afterwards, I'm afraid I've missed you, but you will get a chance for the season review. I did say as well, send in sonnets, Cockney rhyming slang, whatever. We've had some off the wall ones. Tom Hill saying to quote Oasis, and I'm sorry for the lack of Mancunian accents. He says, all we know is that we don't know how it's going to be. Please, brother, let it be. Life, on the other hand, won't make us understand. It's all part of the master plan. Math as well, tweeting us saying, there once was a team from Reading that constantly does my head in. After years of malaise, in League One, they will graze. It's the outcome we are all dreading. Hats off to that. That is class. On to the questions then. We've had a couple on the money front. Royal Stew saying Peterborough estimated that getting relegated to League One cost them around £10 million. What impact will this have on our finances and our ability to recruit under the EFL profit and sustainability boundaries? Well, basically, the thing I'd say to that is that Mark Bowen did say at the fans forum the other night that League One is a little bit looser in terms of what you can do. The EFL will still give Reading a budget. I mean, I don't know how that budget's going to be impacted. I don't know if it's just a number or if it's based on revenue, because obviously the revenue will drop. But Reading will be fishing in a different pool of players. And there's a lot of players that are going to be leaving. I mean, let's face it, players like Yaku Mate, Lucas Shaw, almost certainly to be leaving the club now, whereas the Championship might have kept them on for another year. Couple other questions to throw in. Some people asking about, what's happening with who are we going to keep and everything, who might we sell, which I probably will go into more detail next week. Ollie, there's a few questions coming in saying, Simon Latson saying, how likely do you think it is that Dye will stick around? Biscuit Analytics saying it's time for is it time for the fans to turn against the ownership? Surely it is. And Barney Fritz saying, how can we as a fan base actually do anything about this right now? What positive change can we make? In terms of talk about process and ownership and stuff, I just think Reading are a little bit kind of screwed, really, because as the nature of football, it kind of always has been, but certainly is now, Dayong has tens of millions of pounds of loans owed to him by the club. He invariably changes some of these into shares to kind of lessen it, and then he'll pump more in, and it kind of gets floated around and everything. But the thing is, he's either going to pull the plug, in which case all that money is owed to him still, and Reading are really, really screwed, and his those investments are lost. Or he'll just keep us chugging over, which is probably not a great idea, because his impact on the football club in terms of running it hasn't been great. Or we find a buyer. Now, forcing Dayong to sell the club, I mean, he's not exactly the most present bloke at the best of times, but I can tell you, I can't imagine that he would respond in any way to being forced out. So that just creates a negative atmosphere in my mind. Not that I don't want to be beholden to him. And then the other option is that you have a benevolent billionaire who's slightly better at running football clubs, comes in and takes over. But we can't force that as fans, can we, Ollie? So we are a little bit stuck with him, really, aren't we?
It's just impossible to know what he's thinking. That's the most infuriating thing, because it's 6 years now, 6 years almost to the day that he took over, and he's never given any sort of interview, whether that's in-house with the club or with external media. It's always just names on club statements that he won't have written, and repeated messages from Mark Bowen saying that he's committed, or Dayong Pang saying that he's a private man. It's just infuriating, because you don't know what's going through his head, and that's a worrying place to be at the best of times. But when the club's just been relegated to League One, that's a really concerning position to be in. Ultimately his aim when he came to this football club was to take them into the Premier League, and there's a sad irony, really, that the closest Reading have been to that is on the night that he took over. They haven't been anywhere near it, really. There was the flirtation with the playoffs under Veljko Paunovic, but for most of Dayong's tenure, Reading have been in the bottom half of the Championship, and this has ultimately been coming. It is hard to know, because I think there's rightfully a lot of anger towards him, and I think that should be the case, because ultimately he's taken a football club that was battling for the playoffs, that was on the brink of the Premier League, and he's taken us into League One. Through a series of poor decisions, whether that's the people that he's placed his trust in, such as Ron Gourlay and Kia Drabkian, and Paul Ince to a certain extent, and the people that he's appointed and the decisions that he's made have ultimately led to this moment. He's been the one constant over the last 6 years, and he's spent money but in all the wrong places. There's always the argument that that he spent a lot of money on the training ground, but it's clearly not gone anywhere, because the players have taken the club into League One. So yeah, there have to be serious questions. I think you can have it both ways. I think you can be frustrated and really angry at what he's done to this football club, but also be concerned about what happens without him here. And as I say, that's a really hard place to be in, a sort of really hard sort of balancing act to sort of have in your own head, really, because it's not an attractive club to buy if De Jong does look to sell. It's not as if there's going to be loads and loads of offers of people thinking that this is a club to take on, because the debt is still there. De Jong owns the stadium, he owns the training ground, so they're not buying any assets, they're just buying a failing football club. So
he's also not going to sell it cheaply, as we know. He's not a man to just give things away.
He's one of the most stubborn men of football's ever known. If you're going by his transfer dealings and his refusal to sell players, which again is another reason why we're in this mess, is that time and time again, Reading have received decent offers for players that, really, if you're running it as a business, they should have sold them at good prices. Liam Moore, Liam Kelly, Danny Loader, John Swift, all players who Reading should have got decent transfer fees for, but all of whom, obviously Liam Moore to the football club, but all of whom have left on a free. Liam Moore will almost certainly live on a free. And they've not made any money out of these players where they could have done and could have benefited, for this point for that actually not to have happened. So his decisions again have to be called into question time and time again. And it's a really concerning place for me to be now, not knowing what he's going to do. With the club further away from the Premier League than they have been in 20 years.
Yeah, well, let's wrap up this conversation with the last couple of questions then. Jack Scott saying, do you think there's anything good that can come out of this? Ross, good luck with that question. Anything good can come out of this?
Yeah. I just saw someone saying that we got Paul Ince. So, I mean, that made me giggle a bit. But I think if there's anything good that's going to come out from this, it's that it must be time to actually start using some of the youth now and start seeing what we've got with some of these kids, with Abrefa next season, Rashawn Scott with Kamara or something like that. And, maybe they're the key to the rebuild. Maybe the spine's there and we just don't know it yet. But yeah, I think that if there's anything I can be hopeful for, it's that the kids are going to come and save us in League One.
Yeah, my 2 points for positivity at the moment, firstly, is that this club desperately needed a rebuild. Like, we've started it a year ago with Bowen and Carey and Dublin, people like that coming in and redoing the recruitment and how the football club's looked at. And that is so important that Reading had that. And actually being in League One, but there's an argument, it obviously can go either way, but there's an argument that will force us into a more extreme rebuild, to the extent that there is no talk of getting promoted to the Premier League next season, physically and literally impossible. Whereas there's always been that talk, the ultimate goal and everything like that. And that clouds things, and there's a bit of short-termism that doesn't work for Reading. And that's the thing that, the loans of Chelsea players, the Danny Drinkwaters, the Baba Rahmans, the Andy Cowells and such. I know there was a reason why we had to take those guys, but that just has to stop now. There should be nothing like that now, unless, of course, the club get desperate and try to get promoted from League One through those sort of players. I don't know, but that's one positive for me, is that the club needs a rebuild. In theory, there's a way of it being better in League One than in the Championship. And the second positive for me really is that, whatever was going to happen next season, unless we were going to turn up on the first day having signed, absolute worldies. And even in the 106 season, we didn't know the team we had until about 5 weeks in. We were always going to turn up to next year's Championship season looking over our shoulder and thinking, this is a year to consolidate and survive and see what we've got with this rebuild and everything like that, and probably finish somewhere around 19th or 18th. Now, it's very naive to say this, but if you offer me finishing second or first or getting promoted through the playoffs in League One over that season, I know which one I'll have every time. If Reading have a good year in League One and get promoted, we will have a better time of it as fans than if we'd have been crap in the Championship. Now, I know that is such a 5% naive thing to say, but it's also a fact. So on the positive side, if we can get it together in League One, then we'll enjoy it much more than if we'd have just been floating around in the Championship again. And then after that, the rest will be history. Olly, one of the final things to say as well is that on Monday we do go to Huddersfield for this, crunch game that isn't a crunch game. People kind of talking about, maybe they're not going to go. Is it really that important? Is it going to be too depressing and such like that? Which I'm not really keen on. It's not really. I mean, there's a very good argument for going to support the players. Next season starts now, and all that to say thank you as well to the players that can be leaving who have done a good job. Yaki Meze, Lucas Shaw, just two examples. Noel Hunt as well. Certainly deserves just generally being there to support him and everything. What's your kind of take on the whole, not turning up on Monday or, using it as a protest and such?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't blame people for not going because there's nothing on it. But ultimately, it could be the last game we see Reading play at this level for quite a long time. I think it's a tricky one because, as you say, I completely agree. There's players in that squad who deserve to be thanked really for their for what they've done for this football club, not necessarily this season, but over the course of seasons. Someone like Yaki Mate, who's been here since 2016, has essentially sort of gone from a boy to a man. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but he really has. He turned up at Reading in 2016. He didn't speak a word of English. He was probably a little bit immature to a certain extent. He set out on loan. Didn't really seem as if he was going to make it at Reading, but he ended up sort of being top scorer in back-to-back seasons and being one of the most important players in the side, and that showed ultimately with when he was out of the team with injuries how Reading missed him. So and similarly with Lucas Shaw, who but I think Mate and Zhao are the two joint top scorers in the championship for Reading. So regardless of your feelings sort of towards them this season, they have performed well and they have done this club proud to a certain degree over the last 7 years in Yaki Mate's case and 4 years in Lucas Shaw's case. So it's going to be a strange one, I think, in that away and on Huddersfield on Monday. Sorry. I don't know what the mood is going to be like. I can imagine it's probably going to be quite deflated, but at the same time, you want to try and finish that season with a win. I think it's as I say, it's going to be probably one of the most weird games I've ever attended, really, because I think we all had this high ambition and this almost vision, really, of it being this magical away day where we're going to score a 90th minute winner. Shane Long come off the bench and score the goal to keep Reading in the Championship, and we've not even had a chance to do that. As I say, that's the most frustrating thing, is that we've not had a chance to take it to this final game. But that, as I said earlier, that is completely on us. So it's going to be a weird game Monday, and I'd like to think that the players will be up for it and try and give, if they really are sort of apologetic for relegation, then they'll give the fans one last show. But as I say, we haven't looked like scoring or winning the game for 2-3 months. So our optimism levels when you've just been relegated have to be pretty low, I think.
Yeah, I think that you have to go through these moments as a fan to truly not that you have to go through it to enjoy the highs. I mean, I enjoyed the highs of 106 and everything. I've never been to a League One game with Reading in it. I haven't been to a League One game full stop.
Me neither.
I'm just trying to think.
It might be because I'm young, but this would be the lowest. And I'm not even young. I'm almost 30, but this is the lowest we will have been in my lifetime. I don't know if it is for you guys.
No,
I think that's the thing. I think this is such new territory for so many people. I think obviously as younger fans we are fortunate to a certain degree, because there will be people who grew up with Reading being in the third tier as almost a norm, really. But what's really sad is that this club has become an established club in the top two tiers over the last 20 years. That's down to the hard work of people like John Medeski, Eamon Dolan, Nick Hammond, Steve Cockle, Brian McDermott. So many more people that could be named. All these people that have worked so hard to take Reading from a club that, a small club that was traditionally playing in the third tier, that became punching above its weight, but suddenly playing in the Championship and 3 seasons in the Premier League almost became the norm. Reading have been a Championship club for the last 10 years. They've been a top 2 division club for the last 20 years, and it almost became the norm. really. And the fact that that's been sort of destroyed in the last 4 or 5 years really is really sad ultimately. And I can only sort of think what's going through those people's minds and players' minds from the past that have done so much for the football club and have built this club up to what it was, and they've seen it, destroyed almost before their eyes, and just like the rest of us, have been completely helpless to stop it. And to say that Reading is a League One football club is scarcely believable, really, because no one, under the age of 13 knows what that feeling is like. So we're going into unknown territory. So it's going to be a really weird one next season.
Yeah, I would say as well, I mean, we obviously had Jem Carriage, Hambar Madame, and we've had people like that on the show recently and over the years, and they all very much say the same thing, that it's not really the club that they knew. And for me, this is really the end. I think tonight is the bookend of that era of John Medeski, of Dolan and McDermott people, because that era, it wasn't physically there through the likes of Jaap Stam and Paul Clement, etc., but it was very much the fading away of that era was still happening. There was still the remnants of that era, but that era is fully over now. And for me, this is the start of the De Jong era, in so much that he's been here for a few years now, but this is the starting point of the history of that era, because the history will be written how we respond next. It will start by being relegated, basically, because the first few years will just be the prelude to being relegated. And now the De Jong era goes one way or another. It either goes back up to the Championship and beyond, or it fizzles out and, has pretty miserable times and potentially much more disastrous than that. And on that note, I'm afraid we're going to have to call it a night. And thank you, everyone, for tuning and listening. And thanks very much, guys, for coming on. Ross, always a pleasure to have you tuning in.
Yeah, appreciate it, Mark. And hopefully next time it'll be a more positive podcast.
Olly, the last time you joined us was for Paul Ince being sacked. So always great to have you on Emergency Podcast. God knows what will happen next time you're on.
It's almost like I'm the Grim Reaper almost to a certain degree. But yeah, no, all I'll say is that Reading will be the Papa John's trophy winners 2023-24. Oh. So leave that on a positive note.
So many trips to Wembley could be in front of us in so many different ways. Well, yeah, thank you everyone for listening. And tonight, hopefully this has been somewhat therapeutic, cathartic, whatever it is. The fact of the matter, sadly, is that Reading will play League One football next year. There's not much else I can say past that. For now, at least. Come on, you ass.
Just